All right. So today we had Cristen Martinez. She's an attorney out of Florida. She brings a wealth of knowledge to the investing game, to the business, entrepreneurial game. She puts out a lot of great content. I actually first met her on social media. You wouldn't believe the people that are on there these days. There's actually some real professionals, not just a bunch of kids, recording their cats and making silly videos about their girlfriends. So we had a great conversation. And, really what made me want to interview somebody like this was when my wife and I were looking at how we can protect our assets better and prepare our kids for success in the future, in the event that we pass in the near future or the far future, whatever, right? So how do we actually protect and pass on those assets, tax-free, but also without forcing our kids to have to go into probate and fight for those assets, to fight for, against debt collection and all that stuff. So to make it as easy as possible for our kids. And so one of the ways I did that was I started whole life insurance policies for them. That was one of them. But we also formed a trust, put all our assets in there, put our life insurance policies in there, all that stuff. So that was a really cool, thing that allows us to pass on a lot of our assets and wealth. But the other thing was, how do we pass on the business, right? And so today, Cristen and I will talk about how we do that, how you can protect your business and structure your business. And when I did a video on how ours was structured on TikTok, we got like 400,000 views. So I realized that this was a topic that a lot of people are actually concerned about. So I thought it'd be good to reach out to her and get her on the show and talk about this structure. So we go over LLC formation. We go over how to, structure your holding company if you're a real estate investor or a entrepreneur, as well as, how to best protect yourself and your investors or your family, and set yourself up for success, if and when you want to sell. We go over land trusts too, which are new to me. I'd never actually talked about or heard about land trusts, but she actually offers that as an alternative to doing an LLC. Now it's only appropriate in certain, if you're doing certain things, right, or a certain level of investing or acquiring businesses and assets. So look for that. That one was really interesting for me. I think that was a whole new strategy for me. I'm not sure if we're ready to implement that yet, but so it was a really cool conversation. I hope you guys get something out of this one. I know I did. But please, and at the end of it, if you guys like the show, please give us a rating and let us know, what you think, what kind of guests we should bring on, what kind of, and what we need to do to make this better. All right, let's get to the show. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to The Art of Winning with your host, Ashton. Today, I have an amazing guest, somebody I've been following on TikTok now for a while. Talk about misspeaking. And she puts out a lot of great content. I highly recommend, if you're not on TikTok or if you want to learn more about what she does, check out some of the free information she puts on TikTok. But welcome to the show, Cristen Martinez.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. And I think you bring something to the table that a lot of people will value for sure. And I apologize. I've had a lot of coffee this morning and I'm really amped up. So, but if you don't mind, so I'll give a quick intro as well. But so Cristen, you're a lawyer, correct?
I am, yes.
Yeah, in Florida. And you put a lot of information about how to protect your investment properties, your business, personal assets, business assets. And I found it very helpful on TikTok, as well as reinforcing a lot of things that we do. Now, some of this stuff is specific just to Florida, but other stuff I think, is great across the nation. So we'll apply across the nation. But if you don't mind, can you give everybody like a 60-second overview of who you are, what got you to where you are today? And we'll launch into the conversation that way.
Sure. So I own my own law firm here in Florida, and I started that in 2015. And I didn't ever imagine myself as an entrepreneur. That was never my plan. I started practicing law in 2010 with a big law firm, and I kind of saw some things that didn't sit right with me as far as, prioritizing the bottom line over clients and things like that. And so I moved to a smaller firm thinking it would be a little bit better. And I saw a lot of the same. And one day I, came to the realization that if I wanted to practice law how I thought it should be done and treat clients the way that I thought they should be treated, I'm going to have to do this thing on my own. And so I kind of self-taught and read a lot of books and did a lot of online research and launched my law firm in 2015. Failed a lot along the way, but here we are in 2022 going strong, focusing majority of our practice on real estate law and litigation. We also do a lot of estate planning, but that is kind of the brief story of how I got to where I am right now. It's definitely been a bumpy ride, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
That's awesome. I think I read something the other day. It's like problems are signs that you're alive, because the more problems you have, the more you're actually doing, the more action you're taking, the more you're truly living.
Absolutely.
And that's why I like the entrepreneur stuff. Like, you're out there solving problems. I love getting out there and doing it on your own and the freedom of doing that. But all right. So you mentioned a couple things in there. So I think the estate planning was something that I put out a video on TikTok about how we did our estate planning, and it got a huge feedback. I don't think a lot of people understand what estate planning is and why you would actually do it.
Sure. And I see that a lot too in our practice. People don't like to think about dying and death. And
Right.
If you are, under a certain age, you really don't think it's going to happen to you. And so
Right.
It's not a priority for a lot of people to take the time, but also devote the resources to putting an estate plan together. However, that's a huge mistake in my opinion, because, anything can happen to any of us at any given time. And you don't want to leave it in the hands of the state and our very archaic laws to determine where your stuff is going to go, who's going to make decisions for you if you're not able to make decisions for yourself, who's going to take care of your kids, all of those things that, us as young adults would be very relevant for us, but we might not be thinking about those sorts of things at this phase in our life. But it would be a mistake not to. I certainly understand why people don't. It's not something I enjoy thinking about, but it is very, very important to make sure you're set up properly for that.
And I think, so I want to back up. So last year, a friend of mine, his father actually died, and they went through that. And so his father was a lawyer, but did not have an estate plan for whatever reason, which it was beyond me. But what I found interesting was he was talking about everything he had to go through because of that. So, they had, of course, the house, a couple cars, I think a boat, like all sorts of different things, like guns, and now because he also had debt and maybe owed money on something else, I don't know, he had to go to the court, he had to go through probate, right? And then they're trying to collect debt from the next of kin. And then it's just this long drawn out process. And that was one of the reasons, that was only one of the reasons that we actually pursued putting our stuff into a trust, doing estate planning. But the other reason was not just asset protection, but as real estate investors, we're always trying to get the best leverage, to leverage things. So I found out you can actually take a loan against the trust to, purchase investment property, or obviously you have to do it very strategically. You're not trying to get upside down in debt, but I think a lot of people don't know that you can do that. And
sure. And there are absolutely strategies like that we can employ to make sure that you're not only protected during your life, but you can leverage those assets to your benefit. And then, of course, on the estate planning side, another thing that's not thought about very often is if you are an entrepreneur and you do own a business, what happens to your business if you, as the principal, either become disabled and you can't continue to work in the business or run the business, or you pass away. I see a lot of folks, going on to the state website and creating their corporations and their LLCs, thinking, this is great, I'm going to avoid probate, but without a specific agreement designating what happens to your business and the assets and the employees and the debts and all of those things upon your death or, disability, you are left unprotected, even though you think you've done the right thing by creating the formal entity and things like that. So, there's a lot of, I don't want to say misinformation, but a lot of things that people just don't realize need to be put in place. People hear, oh, LLC, I'm going to avoid probate. Well, that's true, but not unless you have the proper operating agreement in place and you've taken those steps.
Yeah, that is interesting. And I heard a metric the other day, and this fascinates me. So there are, I can't remember how many baby boomers there are, but it was like 2.5 baby boomers are retiring every year right now. And so the percentage of those that were entrepreneurs or owned their own business is huge. And so what happens to all those businesses? What happens to all what happens to all those businesses, right? Are they going to sell them? Or are they going to dissolve them? Are they, if they retire, does somebody else get them? And so like, I think understanding how to protect your business, how to protect your assets within the business and pass it along to your kids or sell it if you had to sell it, right? Is very important. I was going to ask, like, what do you think is the best structure? I know I've seen a couple of your videos. You talk about doing land trusts, which I know nothing about. I have LLCs, but that's it. Would you mind going into that?
Sure. So land trusts are an excellent tool to protect you from liability, lawsuits, creditor protection, things like that, when it comes to real estate specifically. The only thing you can put into a land trust is real estate.
Okay.
Not all states have land trusts. They are a creature of statute, so they're state specific, but the majority of states do have them. And they're kind of a hybrid between what you think of as your typical revocable family trust and a corporate entity like an LLC. It has features of both. So the biggest difference is with your typical revocable family trust, you get zero liability protection. So if a tenant got injured on the property and sued the property owner, which was this, revocable family trust, you as the beneficiary of that trust are personally liable for whatever damages may be awarded to that tenant.
Right.
Conversely, in a land trust, just like with an LLC, the tenant in this case would have to sue the land trust or the LLC, and the owners of those entities are not personally liable. That is the main reason why we recommend using these types of entities. I typically lean toward land trusts over LLCs for a couple of reasons. With land trusts, you do get the benefit of remaining anonymous. So your name is not searchable in the public record when it comes to that property. You can't get that, at least in Florida with an LLC, you can in some other states. The second reason is land trusts are a little bit more user-friendly, so to speak, in that with LLCs and other corporate entities, you have to be very careful not to commingle funds, commingle expenses, because there's something called the corporate veil, and that's what protects you from personal liability. But if you engage in commingling or you use it as a pass-through entity for yourself, that corporate veil could be pierced, which means now you are personally liable. Right. With land trusts, you don't have to be quite as diligent. There's no corporate veil because it's not a corporate entity to pierce. So I wouldn't recommend you commingle with a land trust, but you could, and you wouldn't risk losing that liability protection.
That's really interesting. So I guess, and some of these questions are going to be personal, obviously, because we have our own business and we are real estate specific, but so I'm curious how that would apply. So we do what's called apartment syndication or multifamily syndication, where we pool a bunch of people's money and they're buying shares of an LLC, right? And the LLC acts as the pass-through entity, both for the cash flow, of course, the tax benefits, the equity they own. Would that work the same on a land trust?
So with syndications, I do think you need some sort of corporate entity because that is going to allow you to specify and designate those shares and percentages and things like that. If you wanted to incorporate that anonymity piece of the land trust, you could always create a land trust and then have the LLC be the beneficiary of the land trust. So you're protected from creditors either way in that sense. Just because you have both doesn't mean you're double protected. You're protected either way. But that land trust would give you the benefit of anonymity, which is important because as a litigator, when I have a potential client come in saying, I want to sue so-and-so because I got injured at his apartment complex, I'm going to do my research on you and see if you have any assets to see if you're worth suing. And if I do my research and I can't find anything on you, you're going to be much less of a target as far as people wanting to sue you and put resources toward suing you if they can't ascertain on the front end that you're actually collectible if a judgment were entered.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So I'm going to outline how we have it structured, but I'm curious if there's another way to incorporate a land trust to do this. So typically it's me and my brother are partners. We each own an LLC that owns 50. We own an LLC, a personal LLC that owns 50% of our business LLC. So my brother owns 50 and I own 50 through our personal LLCs. And then that is the holding company for our other LLCs that own each property, our syndications. Now, would it be more beneficial to do, say, the holding company than a land trust that, man, maybe I'm just confusing myself. Maybe I need to write this out. But where would a land trust be useful in that kind of a structure?
So with LLCs and with multiple layers of LLCs like you have, it is more difficult to ascertain your identity with a public record search.
Gotcha. Okay.
If you don't know what you're doing. Now, for a lawyer, it's not difficult because I'm just going to follow the train until it ends with an individual human being, which is going to be you and your brother.
Right.
So you could, I think the only benefit in this type of scenario of using a land trust would be for that anonymity piece. I don't think it's going to give you any more protection. I think it's going to protect you and your brother's identities, so that if someone were going to do their research on you, they couldn't pinpoint the individuals behind the LLCs.
Okay, I understand. And so maybe the land trust is more beneficial for the, people that own single family homes that are not partnered with multiple partners on one deal. Is that right?
For the most part, that's who we serve as our clientele, and we do usually recommend land trusts over LLCs. Sometimes there's a reason to use corporate entities, but for the most part, that's what we're recommending. Now, even in the case where we have, joint ventures or partnerships, people going in together, we have the, money person and the manager person, we will create an LLC a lot of times and make that the beneficiary of the land trust so that the property is still held in the land trust, but the LLC allows us to create an operating agreement that can specify, managerial authority and, who's going to make day-to-day decisions and what happens if this thing goes belly up, things like that, which you can't really do to that extent in a land trust.
Yeah. Okay. I think, a lot of times and you kind of mentioned it, a lot of times the resistance to do this kind of stuff when doing investment properties or business or even the estate planning is the cost, right? So is there the cost the same for the land trust or the LLC typically?
So different law firms, I'm sure, do things differently as far as costs. Typically with this type of thing, I think the most common way to charge is by flat fee. So typically when we see lawsuits, that's when you hear about the billable hour and things like that. But with asset protection and documents, you're typically looking at a flat fee. So typically what I can tell you is for the land trust, the fee to set up the trust is going to be more expensive on the front end, but that's going to be a one-time fee. You don't pay your annual renewals like you do with an LLC or a corporation. So depending on whether this is a long-term hold for you or not, usually the land trust option comes out to be more cost effective because you're not paying. In Florida, the LLC is $125 and you pay it every single year. Right. A lot of states, LLCs are a lot more than that. So you're really basing it off of what is the goal for this property or this investment? How long do I intend to hold it? And that's going to kind of determine which option is going to be more cost effective for you. That
makes sense. Yeah. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Whenever I talk about this stuff, people from California always come in and they're like, yeah, I have to pay $600 or $800 a month or a year for my LLC. But that goes another route too. Like you can get LLCs in other states that own businesses and, vice versa, right? Like because I know a lot of people that'll do it through like Wyoming or Delaware because the taxes are lower. Are land trusts the same in that sense? Can you do that?
You cannot do that with land trusts. Okay. So for at least in Florida and how our statutes are written. But I always like to caution people about using LLCs or corporations in other states to hold assets in a different state, because With real estate, oftentimes, if there were an issue and it turned into a lawsuit,
Yeah.
oftentimes that lawsuit's going to be filed in the county where the property is located. However, the person suing you could also file it in the state where the LLC or the corporation has been incorporated. So if you live in Florida and you're investing in Florida real estate, but you want to use a Delaware LLC because Delaware has more favorable corporate law,
Right.
I would caution you against that, because the added expense and the disadvantage you would have if you had to defend yourself in Delaware against a dispute with a tenant or anything like that,
Yeah.
that's a huge disadvantage, and that's a huge added cost to an already expensive situation. So there are some benefits to doing that, but I think the benefits need to greatly outweigh the risk to make that worth it, because the whole purpose of doing this is to protect yourself in the event of a dispute or something going wrong. And so you don't want to have to hire lawyers in another state and travel to another state to go to court and things like that if that situation did arise.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. And it's definitely going to be I'm sure it's a case by case, basis. And everybody has a different situation, different investment plan, different business strategy, whatever. But yeah, you definitely have to look at that. And that's probably why it's important to talk to people like you before you just go out, because you can do a lot of this online now. You can form your own LLC. Like, it's all like, what, I can't remember the websites, but I know you can do, like, pretty quick. You can put an LLC together, right?
Yeah, so most states you can apply online. They ask you for some basic information. You pay the
Yeah.
fee online, and boom, you have your entity. Of course, I still recommend you get professional counsel on what type of entity to use. And then in connection with that entity, you're going to need your shareholders agreement or your operating agreement to, specify the different provisions, but also, like we talked about earlier, make sure you know what's going to happen to your business if something happens to you, disability, death, anything like that.
Yeah. And that brings up a good point. And I think we probably skimmed over it, and that's my fault. But, why you do this in the first place. I think it's very important, if you have partners, for one, to get down specifics about who's doing what, who owns what, because voting rights, like how you make decisions, like all that stuff's really important. At the very beginning, when you have that big idea, we're making this business, we're investing these, we're buying these properties, like, it's really exciting and everything. But 6 months, 12 months down the line, and decisions have to be made, how do you get to that decision? And all of a sudden now there's a division in alignment and where people are going, and it's not clarified. And yeah. And so if it's not on paper, like, it's not for sure.
Absolutely. And you are so spot on with that. Unfortunately, a large part of my practice is the litigation piece. So I'm suing people, I'm defending people that are being sued. And a lot of times it is in connection with a joint venture or a partnership to invest in real estate. And exactly like you just said, when you are going into something like this, you have the idea, you're looking for that first property, everybody's friends and it's amicable and everybody's excited, and nobody can even imagine not only things going wrong, but if things go wrong, we're just going to work it out. We're going to agree. It's not going to be a big deal. Even family members sue each other over failed investments. And so, I do understand that it's not something people want to think about. They don't want to have to go pay an attorney to do these sorts of agreements, but you will pay in the hundreds to get your agreement. If you get sued and there's no agreement to protect you, you will pay in the tens of thousands for a lawyer to clean that up. And so it's not something that people seriously consider is a possibility when it's either new or things are going great. But trust me when I tell you from experience, it is a possibility, and it can get very nasty if you don't have an agreement, because then it's a he said, she said battle. And that is a nightmare to litigate in court.
Oh, I can only imagine. And then, with family, friends, like, that just ruins everything. But really what you're doing, you're not just protecting yourself, your assets, you're not just protecting the vision for the business and all that, but it's about managing expectations and making your life easier, right? Like, at the end of the day, that's what you want. You want to be clear about what you're doing, what your business is doing, what your partner is doing. Then there's no confusion, and there's no, like, showing up to meetings and I thought you were going to do that. Well, I thought you were, and then next thing you know, and well, I thought we were selling and we're splitting up, and what do we do with this? And what do we do with that? And if you can figure that out on the front end, it's going to be a lot easier. And this is coming from a guy like, my brother is my partner. He's also my best friend, and his wife's in the business and my wife's in the business. And like, that's important to me to not have that kind of division, like we want our roles, our responsibilities clear cut. And not because we argue all the time, just because it's managing expectations, and then it's clear. It's a lot easier. So, and you said that before we started too. It's like, I can't remember the metaphor you used, but I equate it to like, you put on a seatbelt every day. You don't put it on because you think you're going to get in a crash. It's in case of, right? Yeah,
absolutely. And, we see that a lot. So when we're hired to draft these agreements, we typically send the client a list of items that you and your partner need to agree on. And once you've talked about it and you have an agreement, then we can put that into a formal document. And at least half of the list we send them, they have never even talked about with their partner, or didn't even know they should be talking about those things. So just kind of going through that exercise, in addition to having it, documented formally, forces you to have those conversations and think about, well, what happens if this and what happens if that, so that we can make a decision on how those things will be handled while it's still amicable. You don't want to decide that once you're fighting with somebody.
Right. And what's the old saying? It's like failing to plan is planning to fail. Yeah.
100% true. Yes. I mean, I equate it to insurance. Nobody wants to have insurance. Nobody thinks they need insurance until you need it. It's the same thing with this. The likelihood that you invest in a piece of real estate and somebody gets injured and you get sued, the likelihood of that is pretty low. But if that happens, that is catastrophic to your business, and it could be catastrophic to you personally if you're not protected. So you don't need it until you need it, but when you need it, it's very important.
Yeah, yeah. Let me ask you this: one of the things I've heard in the real estate investing community has been people tend to say, "Don't get an LLC, don't get incorporated, don't." Well, no one's ever said land trust to me, but they say don't do that until you get so many investment properties or under management. At what point do you think it's smart to do that, as far as like the cost to benefit? Because a lot of times when people are starting out, they don't have millions under asset and they don't have a ton of cash flow just yet. So at what point do you think it's good to start getting those protections in place?
It is important to get those protections with your very first investment. And the land trust versus LLC issue, the advice might be different if it's your first property versus your 20th, but bare minimum, go online, pay a couple $100, get your LLC so that if you get sued, you are protected. I do see that advice a lot. And the reasoning behind the advice that I see is just get an umbrella policy so that you're covered. You don't need this, legal bills and formalities and all of these, intricate entities set up. It doesn't have to be complex or difficult, but I would never recommend to somebody to have their sole, line of protection to be an insurance policy, because insurance companies are trying to deny claims. They're trying to limit claims. There are so many exceptions and exclusions and things to certain policies that what we're talking about here is if that insurance policy doesn't cover the claim, we're talking about your personal wages being garnished, any other properties you have being taken, any valuable assets you have, your wedding ring, your fine china, your vehicles, if you have a jet ski, all of those things can be taken to satisfy a judgment, which again is extremely catastrophic. So I think if it's your first property or your first few properties, we can keep it very simple and very inexpensive, but you do still need the protection. Yeah.
Yeah. So then I guess my next question would be, so if you do, so I think that's a great answer, honestly. And I think it's a great answer because that's what we did. But I am curious. So I have heard of some people like, oh, I want to keep my costs low, so I'm going to do one LLC and it's going to hold, my first 5 to 10 properties. Do you see problems with that? Obviously, because like if somebody sues for one, now they can access all of them, right?
Exactly. That is the issue. So In that scenario, you are protecting your personal assets, but you are not protecting each one of those properties from each other. So if one person gets injured on one of the properties, and if it is a serious injury and they have a $500,000 to $1 million claim, if the value of that one property can't cover their claim, they can go to the next and the next and the next if they're all owned by the same entity. So ideally, and for the best protection, you want a separate entity for each property. The kickback I get on that is, well, that's, so difficult to manage. If I have 30 properties, I don't want 30 LLCs with 30 bank accounts and all of those things. But once you get to that level, there are ways to utilize both LLCs and land trusts to make it much easier to manage, but you still have the separation necessary to make sure that not only you're protected, but each property is protected from the others.
Yeah, good answer. I like that. That would be catastrophic. I mean, all of a sudden now you're losing more than just one property from one incident. But that absolutely makes sense. Let me ask you this: what is the biggest issue you see in your profession with putting your LLC, owning your property, owning your business in your LLC? Like, what is the most common thing you see that comes back to haunt people, like mistake people made when they do this?
I think it's what we've been touching on throughout this conversation. It's either failing to take the time and spend the resources to have your entities and your structure set up professionally, or it's attempting to DIY your way through the legal process. So anybody can create their own LLC, at least how it's done in Florida. It's very simple. I have a lot of clients that do it for themselves. What you should not be doing is going to Google and Googling operating agreement and taking different sections from different agreements that you like and trying to piecemeal your own agreement. That is a terrible idea. I probably review agreements like operating agreements, land trust agreements, lease agreements that people have done themselves on a daily basis. That my news to the client is not good news, because it is either the agreement doesn't address this, or the agreement is so ambiguous that you have a great argument, but the opposing side also has a great argument. And that's going to make a lawsuit very expensive to litigate. So you want to make sure that you are treating it like a business, and you are employing the professionals that you need to make sure everything is set up properly on the front end so that you are protected moving forward.
Yeah, that's smart. And I think a lot of times it's the cost thing that gets people, the cost and then the ignorance, right? They just don't know what they don't know. But I often say, and a lot of people don't like it, fake it till you make it. Like, if you're trying to become wealthy, if you're trying to become a business owner, real estate investor that owns a lot of properties, do what other wealthy, successful business owners are doing. Copy what they're doing, research how they structure their businesses, research how they protect themselves, how they own all those assets, but they don't actually, they're not liable to those assets or liable to that business. Or, So I think, what do you think about the tax part of it? I mean, a lot of people think that the LLCs are for the tax benefits. Do the land trusts work in the same way? I mean,
So one of the great things about land trusts is it is essentially a pass-through entity for tax purposes. Okay. So whoever you name as the beneficiary, is how it will be taxed. So if you make the LLC or your S Corp or your C Corp or whatever it is, the beneficiary, that's how it will be taxed. Additionally, with land trusts, unlike a corporate entity, is you can maintain the homestead tax exemption if it's your primary residence, if it's held in a land trust, which you cannot do if it's held in a corporate entity.
Okay, so that's interesting. That brings up another question then too. What about, so typically, and this may not be a question you can answer, I'm not sure, but mortgages. So if you have a personal home and a personal mortgage and you want to move it into an LLC, a lot of times you get pushback from the bank, right? Is that something you have with a land trust? And if so, like, how do you remedy that?
Sure. So this comes up a lot, and most standard mortgages are going to have what's called a due on sale clause, which essentially states you can't transfer the property or change title unless you get prior approval from your lender. I have clients that handle this in one of two ways. Some clients will go to their lender and ask for permission. And if you are transferring it to a land trust or an LLC, where you're the primary borrower and you are the sole owner of one of those entities, usually the lenders don't have an issue with it. I have other clients that will basically plan to ask for forgiveness after the fact. In my 12 years of practicing in this space, I have never seen a lender call a loan or a mortgage in default because of that due on sale clause. If they are receiving their monthly payment every single month, that is what they care about. That is how they make money. When I have brought this up with lenders, what they've told me is worst case scenario, we send you a notice and say you need to transfer it back within 30 days. I've also never seen that happen. So me personally, I'd probably go the ask for forgiveness route, but I do have clients that aren't comfortable with that and they do ask for permission up front. And only a handful of times has the lender had any sort of kickback or resistance to giving that consent.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's the big one I think a lot of people worry about, is because they've seen that or heard about it, the due on sale clause. And maybe they want to move like a personal property. Now they're turning into a rental property or an Airbnb or something like that. They want to put it in an LLC. The nice thing about doing that is you don't show, actually, I don't know. Does it, and you may not be able to answer this either. Does it show up on your debt to income if you transfer it to a LLC?
So I believe if it is a single member LLC, I believe it's still going to show up that way.
Yeah. And it's a personal mortgage, so that would make sense.
Right.
All right.
Because changing title doesn't affect the loan or the mortgage. So you're still personally on the hook for the loan, even though you don't actually own title to the property any longer.
So is that even beneficial at that point? Are you still being protected? Because they can find you through the mortgage, right? Like they can.
So transferring property to an LLC or a land trust is not going to protect you from your lender, and it is not going to protect you from the IRS. There is nothing we can do legally to protect you from those two entities. So it will protect you from lawsuits from third parties.
Got it.
It will protect you if you get in a car accident and you get sued personally. It will protect the property from that personal debt. It will not protect you from the mortgage. That is a lien attached to the property that will stay with the property no matter how it's titled.
Yeah, that's good. Is there anything I haven't asked that you think is very important when we're talking about all this? Real estate investing, owning a business in your LLC, maybe even the land trust or the irrevocable trust, estate planning. Is there anything we haven't covered that you think is really important that we should touch on as well?
I think we've hit on most of the main points and most of the questions that I commonly get in conversations with entrepreneurs and real estate investors. What I will say, and I think you actually mentioned it earlier, is a lot of people's failure to set these things up properly and seek professional advice is either ignorance or they're afraid of the cost. And so I think your advice was great. I will also add to that is you don't know until you ask. I mean, for these types of things, we give free 15-minute consultations with one of our attorneys. There are many law firms that will talk to you for free. Ask the questions. For an LLC, we charge $150 and that will protect you. So I think there is a lot of fear over, dealing with attorneys, and you hear the horror stories as far as fees and all of those types of things. And certainly the legal system could be improved in some areas, but for what we're talking about here, for a new entrepreneur or new business owner, a new investor, we can set you up to protect you in a way that you can afford and that is feasible for you at this stage in your journey.
Yeah, that makes sense. And how I like to look at it, and this is just my mindset, is when I hire a lawyer, they're all of a sudden on my team. Now they're on my team and I can leverage their expertise, their knowledge on this whole realm that I have no idea about. Right. And so, I mean, that is what it's about. You want to learn or leverage the experience, the knowledge of people that know and do it better than you. And having a good lawyer, having a good CPA, a financial advisor, having a good real estate agent, broker, like all that's your team. You're putting your team together when you're building a business, when you're building a, real estate portfolio or whatever. And I think yeah, definitely having a good lawyer on your side is extremely important. And a CPA and like all those, super important when it comes to being successful. So I think you add a lot there. I definitely appreciate the conversation today, Cristen.
Absolutely. Yeah. Lawyers get a bad rap, but our job is to protect you and to protect your interests. And we have huge ethical duties to do that at
Yeah.
all costs. And so, especially when we're talking about, protecting you on the front end and some preemptive type strategies versus, oh my goodness, I got sued. Now what? When we're talking about setting up, your business and your assets to protect you on the front end, it's a much more amicable process. It's a much easier process. It's not that kind of confrontational, adversarial situation that you typically think of when you think of dealing with an attorney. So we get a bad rap, but our job is to protect our clients.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm with you. I get it. I get that pushback. People are like, oh, I'm not big enough and this and that. But I definitely think, man, it just adds so much to your business and it lets you sleep better. You don't have to worry about it. Was that in the operating agreement? Didn't like I just call up the lawyer, like, hey, are we okay to do this? How does this structure look? Do I need to change anything? Do we need to make a new one? Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. I think having a good lawyer in your corner is essential to that. But so I definitely appreciate you coming on. I have 4 more questions that kind of wrap up just about who you are and the health, wealth, and happiness aspect in your life. I always like to ask, what do you think is the fastest way to build $1 million or to be successful in building wealth, I guess?
Take risks and don't be afraid to fail. If you look at, very successful people, if you look at the millionaires, they've probably failed a lot more than you think they have. So, and I've certainly failed a lot, and I've been, I let myself get down about that in the past, but failing is good because you learn and you improve yourself and you do better. So take the risks and don't be afraid to fail.
Yeah, that's awesome. What's the worst that could happen anyway, right? I mean, you start over.
Exactly.
And now you have all that knowledge. All right. So what brings you the most joy in your life now?
At this chapter in my life, I would say my family does. And I've, in recent years, I've worked really hard to restructure my professional obligations to allow me not only more time with my family, but more presence and just more quality time with them. And so I have young kids at home, and we're in that kind of chapter of our lives. And so I've really, in the last several years, kind of rearranged my priorities from, I'm just going to be a lawyer and work, 24/7 and be rich and become a partner at a big firm to, these things are actually more important to me. And I'm going to structure my professional life around those things.
Yeah, that makes sense. I used to watch that show Suits. Have you ever watched that?
As did I.
Yeah, it's all business. Those guys are all about money. And I'm with you though. I did 21 years in the military. I got 2 kids, spent a lot of time away from home, and that family piece is really important. All right. So next question, what do you do for health, Cristen?
It's very hard to squeeze in sometimes, but I was an athlete for all of my life. And so I have to have some sort of physical activity on an almost daily basis. And so even if it's just a long walk with my dogs, I used to, I did the CrossFit thing, and I was a little bit more hardcore when I was a little bit younger. But now usually it's just making sure I get outside in the sun and I get at least a walk in, not just for my physical health, but for the mental health as well.
Yeah. No, that's super important. I think we neglect all that when we're trying to build a business for sure. All right, last question. Where can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about you? I've already recommended, I highly recommend people, it's free. She puts out great advice on TikTok. Check it out. Maybe you could share your name on TikTok. I can't remember it off the top of my head. And then maybe where people can reach out if they want more information.
Sure. We are on all the major social media platforms. On TikTok, we are at Martinez Law 13. And on Facebook and Instagram, we're at Martinez Law FLA. And our website is martinezlawfla.com.
Perfect. And that will all be in the show notes, so you guys can check that out when you check out the podcast. But Cristen, thank you so much for showing up. I love this conversation. I think it's one of those conversations that a lot of people don't have. But I think you're sharing a lot of great information and opening people's eyes to that whole aspect of being an entrepreneur, being a business owner, investor, or whatever. So thank you so much for being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone. We will see you on the next one. Take care. All right. Thank you so much for tuning into today's podcast. We hope you found the information and insights shared valuable and thought-provoking. And if you liked this show, please subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss any future episodes. And until next time, stay winning, stay curious, and crush life.